This accident began at Independence Airfield in Oregon, which is it's in Class G airspace. Here we go. This is Independence right here. This is Salem. These two airports are about 9 miles apart. And that's McMinnville, Muni. Just to orient yourself. So this is, I don't know, about 20, a little over 20 miles between these two maybe. So here's what went down. That the pilot in this accident was a 35-year-old male with a private pilot certificate who was working on an instrument rating. There were 2 passengers, both private pilots with instrument ratings. The sequence began at Independence State Airport with a single passenger. The flight proceeded to McMinnville, Muni, about 20 miles to the north, where they flew an approach and landed. At McMinnville, they picked up a friend who was also an instrument-rated pilot, private pilot. While on the ground, the pilot command's instructor called him and told him not to return to Independence because of a dense ground fog that had set in. The mishap pilot stated that they would fly back to Independence, and if it didn't look good, they'd divert to Salem, you know, right over there 10 miles away, or they'd go back to McMinnville. They had lots of gas. Approaching Independence, the mishap pilot made a CTAF call at 10 miles and 5 miles, stated his intention to land, and activated the medium intensity runway lights. The mishap pilot flew parallel to the runway and initiated a base turn with insufficient horizontal spacing, resulting in a centerline overshoot, which he subsequently tried to correct. The plane impacted a power line support pole at 69 feet AGL. The pole was located to the left of the approach end of the runway and about 700 feet beyond the approach end. The NTSB simply said the cause was the pilot's decision to continue flight under visual flight rules into IMC, resulting in collision with an obstacle while landing. Can't argue with that. We have lots of evidence. That's clearly what happened, but let's talk about what happened. By the way, this is what the plane looked like. You can actually see the power pole they struck. All 3 died. At the time of the accident, there was a air mat for fog in this area here. So it was a definite possibility, and obviously you got a phone call. It was beyond a possibility when you got that phone call. So let's talk about this one. The phone call. The guy's instructor, by the way, was watching like Flight Aware or something. He was just watching him. Yeah, he's doing what he told me he was going to do. He's going to fly up to McMinnville, shoot an approach, and get some instrument practice. He's got a safety observer. Everything's good. But he calls him and says, hey, I'm on the ground here and fog has set in. What do you think of the response? We're going to fly back and take a look. And if it's not good, we're going to go to Salem or back up to McMinnville. I mean, it's not horribly unreasonable, right? The fog might have dissipated by the time they got back there because these things, you know, drift in and out. But there's a difference between legal versus smart, right? And I think you can read a lot into this. I mean, I personally have read something into this, and what I think happened was it was a ground fog. Didn't extend vertically very far. They flew back in pretty clear weather. And then they could see the lights of the airfield when they lit up the pilot-controlled lighting. And then we got 3 pilots, and it's, you know, back to your point, was it a macho thing? That I don't know. So anyway, you know, what are the Class G minimums? By the way, this happened about 28 minutes after sunset. Tough biz, right? Really tough biz. On good days, it's tough biz, but on bad days. But, you know, were they legal flying back there? Yeah, probably. They were probably, you know, good visibility above the ground fog. But legal versus smart, it's a question we always have to ask ourselves. Any thoughts over there?
Kind of speaking from personal experience, I've kind of experienced that type of thing flying VFR, both at night and in the daytime. You get a real thin layer of fog on the ground, and you can see right through it. So we get it on the rivers a lot, and that's fine looking straight down where it's only 50 feet, 100 feet thick. As soon as you get down into it, now you're looking miles through it, and you can't see anything. And first time I actually experienced that was with a student at night. Came back to the field, and we could see all the lights. Didn't even realize anything was wrong. We didn't get a phone call saying it was foggy. Right. And we started our flares, like also like, whoa, all we saw was white in the lights and in the landing lights. It's like, where'd the runway go? So we went around, and we actually had to go somewhere else. But it was amazing. We had no idea there was any fog, and so I think, like I said, I think that's exactly what happened here. They could see the lights, and they decided to make an approach. As soon as they got down into it, they had no horizontal visibility. Oops. And I think if somebody calls you and tells you there's fog at a place like this or something like that, wait for it. He's got a person on the ground to get reports. Call him back and say, call me in a half an hour. Call me if you see the fog clear up.
So I'm going to ask you to crank your head around and take a look at this. Take a look at this flight path here. Okay, so they're coming down from the north. They got the runway lights on. They're going parallel to the runway. But look how close they are. Pretty close. This is a 3,000 foot runway here. Half a mile, right? So they're a quarter of a mile displacement maybe. This to me looks like every screwed up circling approach I've ever watched a student fly, okay? They can see the lights. As they get to the end of the runway, now he's starting to lean left a little so he can continue to see the lights. And he's cutting even more space. He's cutting down his turning room. And then tries to make this one, he does make the 180, but then realizes he's not lined up anymore and tries to correct it. But, so I guess what I would say is, what techniques do you suggest to ensure turning room even on VFR pattern? If you're at some place that you don't know your way around, you don't have landmarks that you fly with. It's not like flying in and out of Merrill Field every day where I'm going to be over Costco or whatever. Techniques for getting proper displacement, or whether it's a circling approach or a visual. They're both visual approaches, frankly.
Something that really bothers me is when people do pick landmarks.
Yeah.
What do you do when you get to an airport you don't been to before? You don't have those landmarks. You use the runway. You use the runway marker as the threshold. Judge from that. Do that every time. Doesn't matter whether you're familiar with the airport or not. And then you can go anywhere.
And I'd say, Darlene, in this case, it was perfect because it's a 3,000 foot runway. It's a half a mile long. Ideal. So, in your mind, you could just flop that thing out horizontally. You know what I'm saying? You see the runway lights? Flip that horizontally. So, I need to be over there. In order to have a half mile spacing on that runway, I need to be over there. And if it's a 6,000 foot runway, you don't want a mile displacement, but you don't need to use the whole runway. You can, in your brain, pilots, we gotta visualize these things. Flip that thing over and fly to the point where you see that it goes. Yes, sir. Were you raising? Oh no. Okay.
You always have a touchdown.
This is how it works.
Okay.
I always have a touchdown point. Don't you think? Somewhere on the runway.
Yeah.
So it's probably not too soon to talk about a stabilized approach. On final, my idea of a stabilized approach, and I've heard it from a lot of other people too, is on speed, on glide path, and properly configured. And if you're not all three things, then guess what? You go around. And I suspect that he probably didn't have all those things in his favor.
Well, he clearly wasn't stabilized.
Yeah.
He never got lined up. So that's problematic for sure. I mean, another way you can skin this cat, and you want to make sure you have enough turning room. You just fly to one end of the runway, you make a 90-degree turn, and then you make another 90-degree turn. You've made two 90-degree turns. You've got sufficient spacing now to fly base and roll out on final. So,
I will add too that for me, ground fog or any kind of fog is probably the scariest environment to fly in because it distorts everything, you know, you can't see
Yes.
straight lines.
yes.
And everything kind of blends in, so you don't have the definition that you really need to make a safe landing or even make a continued flight.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. It makes things look farther away than they really are, for sure.
Yeah, so that's what I was gonna say, is perception is off because of the fog.
Go ahead.
I have a very different type of flying than many of you probably do, and so I'm just gonna offer something that doesn't overlap these at all. Once you got the call that it was foggy, and this is a VFR only airport, and Salem has instrument approaches, I'm going to Salem, and then when you make the turn and you're trying to be stabilized, you have an instrument approach programmed into your system. I know that doesn't work for a lot of kinds of flying done around here, but when it does, you're returning to Anchorage, it won't fix the fog. But everything else in terms of lining up and so forth, it gives you that advantage.
Yeah, concur. And I've had the same experience you have. Everything's hunky-dory, and then you get to like 100 feet, and all of a sudden it goes, whoop. Well, let's go back to see if there's anything else we got to explore here. Oh, wrong way. Oh, yeah. So we talked a little bit about hazardous attitudes here. We got 3 private pilots, 2 of them got instrument ratings. And I'm with you, I think that probably nobody wanted to tell their friend, hey, bag this, you know, this is too dangerous. Another thing, if you got the avionics, even if it's you know, a laptop, not a laptop, but a iPad or something that you know, most of your flight software will give you a VFR, a straight in line basically from the runway. You can figure out whether or not you're on that line. Some of them will give you glide slope information too. But that's a if you've got it, and hopefully you don't have to use something like that because you're not going to try to fly an instrument approach when you're not on an instrument flight plan. Let's see.
Was the pilot in command instrument rated?
No, he wasn't. He was training for his instrument rating. The other 2 guys had instrument. So the first guy he took off with was his safety pilot, and they did an instrument approach up at McMinnville and landed VFR conditions.
And we don't know how much experience they have.
No, we don't.
They were in a 172, if you're flying the downwind, the runway, you have to strut, there's a spot on the strut where,
No, yeah.
you know, they should have known right away.
Well, and that's another thing. You know, as long as you're at the same pattern altitude, and they were familiar with the airfield, so they should have been.
Yeah.
They should have been able to do that.
Those are
But
the simple
but
things.
while we're talking about that, if you are flying, I note if you're an instrument rated pilot, and you are flying a circling approach, chances are your circling minimums are not going to be the same as your normal pattern altitude. You're going to be lower, and so that will give you a very false indication of how far out you are. So it works, it's perfect for normal pattern altitude.
VFR, okay.
So they just need to be, yeah.
Which brings up practice. I remember the first time I had to do an actual circling approach IMC coming back to Merrill, and I took I was CFI. I took the controls from my student. I was not allowing that student, who I had a lot of respect for, to fly that thing because we are way low. You know, we've got lots of buildings around. No, you do 1,000 of those, then you get comfortable with it, but then you need to be practicing to know what all of those things look like, where your safety is, and going back to the previous one, if it's an airport you don't know, no, they did here. Yeah, just know, go elsewhere.
Okay. Anything else? Yes, sir. He's bringing the mic to you.
I'll just speak up. There's a lot of contributing factors here, but if you kind of peel the onion back, it seems to me like there's a lot of experience well, relative experience, right? There's a lot of people in there that have been flying these airplanes, recent instrument ratings. We've all been in this position, right? When we're out flying around, there's something that maybe not looks so good. What are some thoughts on how to approach the pilot flying, say, hey, maybe this isn't such a good idea in a way that's gonna make you seem not like the wet blanket?
Anybody want to answer that? I don't think, my answer is I don't care.
Yeah, fair enough, but
I'll be as wet as I can be.
yeah.
I can tell you that this has happened to me, and just speak, I mean, I personally have spoken up and said, I'm starting to get uncomfortable here. And that's all you need to say, and then it just plants that seed in that person. Obviously, if you get somebody that's got a macho attitude, there may be a conflict back and forth, but, you know, it takes quite a bit to get me uncomfortable, but I have been uncomfortable and I've spoken up. Sure.
My airplane.
I don't know if I take anybody's controls away. I will definitely speak up.
It's like, actually, my mentor in Alaska, who had, 40 years of flying in the mountains in Alaska on floats, and we flew up through the saddle into Crescent Lake one day, and I didn't even know why he wanted, I was thinking, why are we going over here? Because the winds were kind of crazy that day, and they get really bad at Crescent Lake. And we went in there, and we're flying along on one side of it, and we got in a downdraft, and it looked like he wanted to continue to the opening at the end. And I knew we weren't going to make it. We would be on the ground before we got there. And I'm waiting for him to turn around. Finally, I said, aren't you going to turn? And he goes, oh yeah.
Good idea.
We turned around and
Oh, yeah.
say something.
Yeah, I had an incident when I was a young captain. The wing commander was flying the airplane. It was at night. We're coming back. This was in South Carolina. There's a big swamp off the end of the runway, but it was, kind of gooey, and we were flying in ILS, and he just kept getting off glide slope, and I tried to encourage him, I'd get him back, and then he'd get off glide slope, and finally I just said, I got the airplane. I wasn't gonna let him do it. So, yeah, you gotta assert yourself if it's you, right? But that wasn't your question. Your question is, because you're gonna do it now, right? You're gonna assert yourself if somebody scares you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I think we all are now. All right, I guess we'll move on. Okay, in this segment, we've got a couple of different accidents. We'll talk about them both, and then we'll get to the discussion items. So there's some common elements between the two accidents. The first one occurred in Murrieta, California. The mishap pilot was a 39-year-old private pilot. His 3 passengers were his sons. He had 65 total hours, all in the 172. So he'd just gotten his private pilot's license. The accident flight was the second flight of the day. He completed the first flight with his wife and 1 son, then loaded up the other 3 sons for the second flight. Surveillance video showed the mishap aircraft touch down approximately 1,000 feet down a 6,000-foot runway, roll for a couple of seconds, and then climb back into the air in an unusually nose-high attitude. The airplane began drifting left, rolled inverted, and crashed, killing the pilot and seriously injuring all 3 children. And that's how it ended up. I don't have the overhead of this, but he's between 2 rows of hangars off the left side of the runway. It was all captured on surveillance video, and the guy that was watching it all was able to say, no, his flaps were full down. I could see light between his flaps and the wing, so I know they were full down. And it looked like they started to retract just before or just as the plane began to stall and roll over. One of the surviving children, and remember these are his sons, none of them are pilots. One of the surviving children told the investigator that shortly after touching down, he heard a pop noise and then the airplane began to shake. His father's demeanor changed and he cussed and panicked and took off again. and he probably did. So the NTSB says the probable cause, pilot exceeded the critical AOA during takeoff, resulting in aerodynamic stall and loss of control. Contributing factor was the pilot's retraction of the flaps at the critical moment. The next accident occurred at, yeah.
This is that same issue.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did have a better slide. So this is the overhead view. That's where it came to rest. So it just kind of came over the top of these buildings, rolled inverted, and crashed up against the hangar there. Now I'm doing good. I'm in the right state. So this one was across the country in Massachusetts, Minuteman Field, in a 182. There were 3 serious injuries. In this accident, the pilot was a 57-year-old male private pilot with 326 total hours, 35 in the 182. The pilot reported he was fast on approach, bounced 3 times on the 3,100-foot runway, and initiated a go-around. His flaps were fully extended. He turned right to avoid trees, then left to avoid a house, and subsequently hit the trees. And of course, the probable cause, delayed decision to abort and go around, resulting in collision with trees. So let's start by talking about why do we go around? What are the things that make us go around?
Stable approach.
Unstable approach, okay. What else?
Moose on the runway.
Yep, anything on the runway, right? Moose, trucks, cars, kids, bicycles, see them all. So stability is listed up there. Yeah, sometimes another airplane pulls on the runway in front of you. You never know. So, especially because we have airplanes still flying out there with no radios at all, and they may not know that you're in the pattern. But what's the key? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, just gonna say, we talked about stabilized approach, but let's say you're in a crosswind that's too much for you or the airplane, and you're drifting off. I mean, that's still part of the approach, even though you're over the runway, time to go around.
Yeah, I concur. I mean, if it's just too much to handle, or you think there's a good chance you're gonna go skipping off the side of the runway after you touch down, it might be time to find a different place to land. Who in the audience has had to do a no-kidding emergency, kind of like, I need to get out, boom, right now, something's gone wrong? Anybody? Yeah, we got several. What were the circumstances?
Botched instrument approach, way above glide slope, between mountains,
Okay,
catch can.
yeah,
I just said, I'm not gonna get back on the glide slope here and
that's a good reason.
going around.
Anybody else? Because every one of these is unique, right? But this is another thing, back to Mark's earlier point, how often do you actually practice a go-around? I mean, it's such a bone-simple thing, right? Power flaps, power, gear, it depends on what kind of airplane you're flying, but
So missed approaches, of course, when we do instrument practice, I get exact phrasing, but it was something like, since the days of the Romans, we always go missed when we're doing practice. But an actual emergency, when the emotions are there, and I have not done this kind of thing, mine was the opposite. I had an aborted takeoff I had to do, clear to take off here at Merrill. I'm about at VR, and a helicopter that had been cleared was low, crossed directly in front of me. So I did what my training did, pulled the power back, settled back. Nose wheel did not like this. Owner, it was a rental plane, owner of the rental was waiting for me when I got back, and then was happy once I told him, said, no, I wasn't gonna fly straight up into a helicopter. But I had never had to practice something where there was a real weight. If I take off, I'm gonna hit the rotors, or at the very least go through the rotor wash. And it's a lot different. Again, I'm here partially because I have less experience, a lot of people in the room. it is no joke different when something happens like that, and how much training do we do that affects the psychological portion of that. We need, our standard practices with going around are all made early, not late.
Yeah.
You know, I want to say that, you know, how many of us, probably a lot of us have made landings work that didn't start out very good. You know, maybe you bounce again. How many times do you bounce before you go around? But, you know, we've salvaged these, or maybe you've landed long, you know, maybe a little fast. So we've salvaged so many landings that we're apt to do the same thing over and over again. So, I mean, it's something you have to kind of force yourself to do, but every once in a while you should make a go around. I mean, look, you know, you've got people watching, you know, they've got cameras and you're worried that somebody's gonna see you go around and uh-oh, you know, it's a mistake. But I think that, you know, you should try to practice every once in a while, get that, muscle memory going, you know, with the Cessna, you know, how do you go around? There's a specific, like the book says specifically how, you know, what you do with the flaps, what you do with the power and all that. And you have to do those in the right order at the right time in order to do it successfully.
Yeah, yeah. I'd like to add to that, though, that most of the go-arounds you do, if you're making a timely decision, you sure don't need to climb at VX, right? Climbing at VX is, if your engine poops and you're climbing at VX, you are going to stall. You got no time to react. So VX occurs about 2 knots above the stall. That's where VX is. So if you don't have to, you know, if it's not save your life kind of thing, you probably want to be a little faster. Darlene?
I don't understand the mentality of people that think going around is a bad thing.
Right.
Going around is a really good thing. It's going to prevent a lot of accidents that people do.
Yes, sir.
I think the biggest one that's missed here is type of equipment Cessnas, and they got those stupid little electronic flaps over there. You got to hold the uppy downy, and you can't dump them. I mean, we got a lot of 12 drivers, a lot of 25 drivers, and when it's time to go around, you dump it and grab a click. Beaver pilots, of course, you die if you dump them. But that's a whole different story. But I think that's one of the biggest things is in your equipment, if you got to know that your go around, if you're reaching across the panel and waiting, and you may even want to talk to your MP to have something different put in there, because I'm sure you get all 206 flaps modified.
Well, electric, I've never liked electric flaps. I had to make a forced landing one time because the flap stuck down 40 degrees in 150 many years ago. And it turned out fine. I was on a road that not used much. The trees were a little higher than I thought they were. It was narrow, but I was always used to narrow strips. So.
I've got the old Johnson bar in my plane, but what I hate about it is I can't land with tight things because I can't reach it. So,
Just to go back quickly to the getting people used to go arounds. If you haven't heard it, you need to look up the song "You Can Always Go Around."
yes, sir.
Well, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I'm gonna tell a story that, you know, I do a lot of off airport. I've had more off airport, even though I've flight twins around the world even and stuff. And, I had a PA-12 78, it was like my son, 3,400 hours in it. And, my mission was to go out, fly fishing on the, Kanaktok River, it comes in that Quinhawk. And been over in the Togiak River, I had a passenger with me, had a GoPro on it, and called on my sat phone to the camp, and I said, how's your weather? And they said, oh, we're good here, but it's all foggy down river from us, but it looks like it's clearing off. So I went from somewhere on the upper Togiak over through the mountains there and got to Kagati Lake and came down the Kanaktok, and there was a lot of mist and stuff, and that PA-12 had a propensity to carbide, so I was doing a lot of carb heat. I reviewed it. I had a running GoPro going on this whole thing. So I get to the camp and it's clear. I say, okay, well, I got to find a sandbar, and it's a really twisty river. I mean, and it has a 8,000 CFS, about like the Kenai River, you know, but I'm looking at crescent-shaped sandbars, and I find one that's downriver about a mile, I time it a couple times and make a practice approach to it, doing the same thing, carb heat on, carb heat off. And then, okay, so the gut factor feels good. I says, it's a little short. I says, what's your option? He says, well, if I get down in there and it doesn't feel good, I'll go around. You know, I was always a go around guy. And so I figured I got about 450 feet and then it's gonna curve pretty good. So set down within 2 feet of the end, on the brakes, and there's an outside bank, it's a pretty high bank, alder covered. And I said, I don't like it, I'm going around. Carb heat in, full power, ain't nothing there. I mean, the engine's running, but I'm making like a 65 horsepower champ, and I'm looking at this friggin' bank. BX, I mean, I had flaps down to 10 degrees, which is good for climbing that plane. And then at that point, another mentor thing said, planes are disposable, people aren't. So I made the best thing I could do, I'll throw my hand over it, I put a hard left in, put the left wing into the water, started crawling up this bank, almost made it, chopping alders, tail slide back down in, both lift struts went over. Got no exit, we're in the water sinking, and I rebuilt that airplane, and I says, my passenger says, just push that glass and get out. So out he went. The lodge was coming down with a boat already to pick us up. We're thinking, I even pulled the friggin' GPS radio and threw it out. We had $10,000 worth of fishing rods, got it out. I was up to my chest and got out of it. But, you know, that was one time that, hey, that was my backup, was to do a go-around. In retrospect, I've been better just to stay with it. Ground loop it left, maybe get one gear out. So when you're in off airport, a lot of times there's a lot of one-way stuff, and it's really a heightened risk thing because you got to do it. And now I'm more prone to, hey, yeah, if it's bad, if it's a bounce or a skip, can I reasonably save this thing rather than risk something that I gotta climb out now and make a turn in a canyon or something like that. So anyway, that was my one and only experience. I lost my son that day, so not my true son, but my airplane son.
Yeah, and in fact, we didn't talk about that yet, but it's one of the bullets up there. When are you gonna, you know, if you're on the ground already, nobody knows why that guy went around. You know, popping sound and vibration, big deal. You're on a runway, you're on the ground, you know, why go back up in the air?
Who cares? You know?
I was just gonna say, let's all agree on what the go-around looked like, especially Cessna's kind of a common airplane that most of us have flown or have. So what's actually the procedure that's spelled out in the handbook about go around for like a Cessna 182, 172, 180, what is it? Who knows? Somebody out there?
Isn't it max power and 20 degrees of flaps?
Yeah, but that's the thing. So, you know, if you're probably coming in with full flaps, so right, max power, obviously you want to, you know, get your airspeed, and you want to bring up your flaps from 40 or whatever it is to 20, which is really important, and you want to stop at 20, because what happens when you go beyond 20 going up, now you're going to sink. You're going to sink quite a bit, and that's probably, you know, I think, yeah, not happening in this one, but, you know, there's a lot of
The
stories.
sequence is important, whatever
It is.
your manual calls for,
And
you
if
need
you
to
have-
know what it is and do it.
Yeah, and if you haven't looked at the manual in a while, it's not a bad idea to just look at that paragraph, because it's very important that you don't raise the flaps all the way, and that you get your nose, power, lower your nose, get your airspeed, flaps up, and you don't have to do it very quickly, but you have to do it in the right sequence, and it has to be a continuous thing. It's not like you have to, just do it that quick.
Yeah, so when you first asked that question, what the Cessna was, and I fly a different plane out from the 182, my response to the go-around was this. That was my answer, because I'd been pushed long enough that I knew that's the throttle, I'm catching the carb heat, and my flaps are right over here, I can reach it blind. When you've got it down that well from training is when you will do it right. We talked about the disadvantage of electric flaps. I mean, hey, they work great on the air runners, right? So if you're doing instrument stuff, they're fine, but they're not if you're trying to drop in on gravel bars. But have that training, because if you're in the Cessna, you need to make the decision earlier. And then, yes, you know, your answer needs to be just like you would for an engine out, right? In the Cessna, that's.
Yes, sir.
One of the things you didn't mention in any of this, and it's not listed here, is trim.
Yeah.
For a stabilized approach, you're gonna have trim.
Yeah, and in fact, we're gonna get, if we don't run out of time, we're gonna get the one, but trim is good, a good subject to talk about. How do you like to trim the airplane?
Yeah, that's a good point. I was thinking the trim and, you got full flaps, 40 degrees probably in this case, and you got it all trimmed out so when you caught in all that power, the nose can go straight up in the air. So, power, flaps, and then the trim, I know the Flying 185 is a little bit, you use a lot of trim, makes a nice stabilized approach, so you got a lot of trim in there. So yeah, on the rare occasion when you have to do a go around, usually you have, even if you are right down on the runway, you have a lot of distance in front of you, so you don't have to, like I said, you don't have to climb out of VX, you don't have to climb out of VY. Just get
Right,
the nose down,
if you
take your
make
time.
an early decision and you got the right aim point, you're not starting by aiming halfway down the runway.
Right,
Yeah.
you should have plenty of room, there's no reason to panic, and then, this guy on the runway, and you hear a pop noise again, you're on the ground. I had a sort of similar thing on a takeoff, actually, in the Beaver. Of course, I was by myself, but readily could. I just about to get on the step, and my low fuel pressure light comes on. So instinctively, I immediately switched tanks and did the fuel boost. And then I thought, well, wait a second, I'm still on the ground. So I pulled the hammer back. So yeah, so if you're on the ground, stay on the ground. Don't, you know, if something like that happens, or especially if you don't know what it is, you're probably much better off than being back in the air.
Other thoughts on trim?
I was just gonna add to that, you were talking about trim, but, so, and you mentioned the 185, 185, if you wanna do a 3-point landing with full flaps, the book says you have to trim it all the way nose high. And when you go around, as Scott would tell you, and some of you people already know, is now you've got a tremendous amount of pressure, and you've got to trim, and sometimes if you're holding a lot of pressure on that yoke, you can't trim because now you've loaded up the whole trim mechanism, so it's very hard to do that. And I'm gonna say, don't necessarily practice this on close to the runway, but go at altitude. If you, full power, that little extra, that last little bit of throttle movement all the way to the end, puts a lot more load on the trim. So if you went up, say, and you gotta be careful, like I say, you wanna practice this at altitude, but if you go up, say, almost full power, but there's just a little bit left, you can actually, it's a lot easier to move the trim wheel, but I'd say, when in doubt, obviously, you wanna use all the power as soon as possible rather than waiting till later. I'm not, suggesting that you don't use full power, I'm just saying is a little easier, bringing the power all the way, at least I would, trim it, and now you can put the rest of the power in, but again, you gotta practice it out, you gotta be careful you don't too close to the ground.
Yeah, and there's some personal preference here. I always like to have my plane trimmed that I have to keep a little bit of back pressure on it myself. I like the fingertip amount of, at least that much back pressure. So I don't trim it completely neutral in the back.
Makes a nice wheel
I'm holding
landing.
back pressure all the way.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's my technique, is when I now fly them all, and it's the same thing, if you've got it trimmed all the way up and you put power in, and you've got the full flaps in, you really feel it on here. The tiny thing I was gonna add is, one of the reasons that's a problem for me is I'm a cyclist. My legs are great in strength, my arms are not.
Yes, sir.
One quick note that's come up a couple times is carb heat is a de-ice, not anti-ice. I got scared on a go-around, of course, young, stupid, girlfriend on board, off airport, all that silly stuff. And I'm going around and it's getting ugly, and all of a sudden I reach over, got the carb heat. And that's all I needed, but you can cycle it in the base, you can cycle in the turns, but when you roll final, you put that carb heat back in, If you get carb icing in between final and wheels landing, you can make some bad decision making, and you better put it on the ground now. But when you do need it, that one little extra action of grabbing, reaching, goofing, and if you forgot it, you're staggering, not worth it. So cycle the carb heat, and when you're roll final, panel's clean, you're ready to park it or go around.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Just one caution on carb heat that I've run into flying in cold weather, when it's 20 below or worse, let's say. If you're shoving in your throttle and your carb heat at the same time, you're leaning the heck out of that engine. You're giving it a big slug of air, and a lot of time that thing will quit. What I try to do with cold weather is get my throttle up, let the RPM come up, so I'm sure the engine's running, and then push the carb heat off. So I don't want to kill it by giving it a big slug of air.
Yeah.
When I was instructing, you'd see that in the wintertime, people flying a 152 or 150, 152, 172. What would happen is they'd shove the power in, get the carb heat off, let's forget that for the moment. And then you were talking about all that forward control force. Well, now they want to trim that off because it's hard to hold on to. And they get it trimmed off real nice and it's flying good, but it's not climbing because the distraction has caused them to forget the flaps.
Yeah. Yep. So we've talked about this in manner of speaking, that, you know, this last thing, the impulsivity of doing something. You know, both of these guys had the impulse to do something, but they didn't think through what they were doing. They just blindly did something, and they ended up wrecking their airplanes, and one of them was a terrible accident. Okay. Anything else on this before we move on?
I just say, meaning the stabilized approach, and I mentioned in mine, is that do a gut check every final, even if everything's good. Just, you know, is it that log that's coming down the Yetna or whatever? It's just like, pay attention. Okay, I'm down that last 100 feet. My stable, I'm ready to do this. You know, my mindset, I'm not have all these, well, what if this, you know, it's just like, I'm committed, I'm gonna land here. Is it ready? If it's not, then yeah, go around. But that's something that if you get ingrained into thinking that, am I ready to do this? If it's beyond your capabilities, there's not right, that's the decision making. I think that goes by a lot of people, and then it's just served me really well.
I think it's important to add to that, because I believe that you have to be more comfortable as you're, for instance, in a pattern going to land at an airport, whether it's off airport or a control field. You need to be more comfortable every step of the way. If you're getting less comfortable, you know, it's telling you, your body's telling you something, and you need to listen to it. I think that's very important, you know, and I think about that all the time too. Every time with downwind, base, final, you need to be more and more comfortable at the situation you're in. You know, I'm stabilized, I know where I'm gonna land, runway's clear, whatever. If you're getting less comfortable, then, you know, it's time to think about the alternatives.
Get control of your breathing. I think that's really important, especially if there's an emergency. So it should be automatic. But when I fly, I mean, especially, you know, when I'm on long final, I just have a habit of getting control of my breathing. Just, I don't know, calms me down.
Sure.
So, I don't know if I know how to use the mic.
The yellow.
Just talk.
Okay.
So, I've got a fair amount of off-airport experience, and I was always taught on landing, stabilized approach, put carb heat on. But then a pilot from Talkeetna gave me some advice, and that is on short final, once you're pretty much assured landing, push the carb heat off. And that does two things. If you need to go around, you've already got that off, it's one less thing to do. I listened to what the gentleman over here said about when it was real cold. But, the other thing that pushing carb heat on, or turning it off when you're on short, very short final, you're not gonna get carb ice in the last 30 seconds before you touch down. But it puts in your mind the concept, I'm gonna take carb heat off because I might need to go around. And that mental attitude, I think, has been helpful. I have not tried it at 20 below.
Yeah, I don't wanna be out there when it's 20 below. Anybody else? Before we leave this,
Let me just understand one
Yeah.
thing. You know, carb heat works best at cruise power or high power setting. When you've got your power all the way back, you probably don't have much heat rise in the system. So, you know, that's one of the reasons that, yeah, it doesn't matter as much when you're on short final, pushing it in, right? It's only when you're generating heat from the engine that real carburetor heat works best.
Yeah.
It doesn't work as good when you don't have any heat from the engine.